Hello, everybody. Welcome in. How are you all today? Welcome. Hi, Linda. How are you? Hello. It is Watch Me Wednesday, and I've got a jam-packed information session for you all today. I'm going to be talking about quilt labels and why I think they're so important and what I think you should include on them. Hi, Sue. How are you? Hi, Heidi. Hi, Deb. How are you? Hi, Patty. Welcome in. Say hello to everybody if you're just joining in. Glad to see you on this hump day. We are officially over the middle of the week, gliding down on into Friday. Looking forward to having that Friday. Yeah, it's going to be a crazy day today, I think. It's been kind of weird for me today. I feel like I'm running in a little bit of slow motion today, but getting my groove on, getting ready to show you what I've got in store for you. And stick with me to the end because I do have an announcement at the end that I think you all want to hear. So, and if you are just joining me, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and sharing the video so that others can join in on us. If you can't join me live, if you you could always watch me on my YouTube channel afterwards. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do that while you're there. It's free. It's one of the only things around on the internet anymore that you don't even need an account for, which is kind of cool. So hit the share button, share this video, and we are going to talk quilt labels. And I know a lot of the times that quilt labels are kind of one of those things that you know you got to do, you procrastinate about it, and sometimes you do it, you don't really want to. Sometimes you really want to do it, and you get it done. But they're really an essential and important part of quilt making, and for a lot of reasons. Your quilt has taken you time to create. You've put a lot of time and effort into making and creating these masterpieces that one day, hopefully, will become heirlooms for your children, your grandchildren, family, etc. Whether you've given them as gifts too, those are important as well to put labels on for a lot of reasons. And we're going to go over that. And I'm going to show you various ways that I've created quilts and some of the information that I put on quilts, because I think the information is super important. I really believe that the more information that you can have in a very concise format on your quilt label will tell a story later on after we are gone. And let's face it, we are all going to be gone at some point, but our quilts will live on, hopefully. I know that some will be tattered and torn and well loved, and that's what we want for most of our quilts, right? We want them to be well loved and appreciated. But if nobody knows who made it, where it came from, etc., they can't appreciate it to the fullest extent. So that's why it's super important to put a label on your quilts. And yes, I am guilty of not putting labels on my quilts or waiting to the very last minute and then putting a label on afterwards. But sometimes in that process of waiting and putting it away, you lose some of that valuable information that you might want to put on it. For example, when you completed the quilt. So say you have a quilt that you completed and you've just decided, I'm not going to put a label on it right away. And you put it away, or you leave it on, it's decorating the couch or it's on a wall and you haven't made that label yet. Well, what's going to happen when, say, 5, 6, 7 years down the line saying, oh my gosh, I didn't put a label on that quilt. Do you remember when you finished it? Do you remember who the pattern was designed by? Do you remember the fabrics you put in it? Things like that are super important to document on that label. So I'm going to show you first, I have a quilt sitting here that has a very rudimentary label on it. Nothing spectacular, but it does tell a story. So I'm going to switch camera views so that you can see. And this is where it comes in. It's pretty important. So you're going to see here on this, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit here so that you can see, oops, wrong camera. I don't want to zoom in on me. I want to zoom in on the quilt. Okay, let's zoom in on this quilt. Okay, so there we go. And so what you see here on this label is you see the name. So I put the name of the quilt. Now, this quilt is called Tarnished Windmill. It is a design by Judy Niemeyer. It's not a name I gave it because it's not my pattern. It's not my design. Now, let me also preface this by saying that I know a lot of us give names to our quilts because it means something to us, or it speaks to us in a certain way, and that's okay. So if you have a special name for it, I would still put it here, but I would also put the name of the original pattern and the designer. This is my feeling, and I think that it's important to document that because somewhere down the line, somebody else might want that information because it's a published pattern, and they might want to make that if they can. I mean, if it's not, if it's still around, they might want to make it. So that's important. I didn't name it something other than Tarnished Windmill, this particular quilt, because I just didn't want to. So this quilt is called Tarnished Windmill, designed by Judy Niemeyer, pattern by Judy Niemeyer, pieced by me. And so I put my name and I put my business name because I did it with my Fresh Pickens fabric line. And you'll see that on here. So I put piece by Jackie Kunkel of Canton Village Quilt Works. I also did not quilt it, so I put who it was quilted by because I think that's important. Now, if I do the whole thing, I'm going to put pieced and quilted, etc. I'm going to, I want that information here so they know whoever gets this quilt in the end, they're going to say, well, like say it's one of my kids, they're going to say, well, my mom made the whole thing. Well, no, I didn't make the whole thing. They're going to see that I pieced it, but Margaret quilted it. And I did it out of my Fresh Pickens fabric collection from Island Boutique. So I thought that these were all relevant things to the quilt. Now, the one thing that you will see that I forgot to put on here, and I can still add it because I actually know the date. I didn't put the date on here. So that was a faux pas on my part, but because it's just all I used here was batik fabric, and I used a Pigma pen, and I heat set it so that it stays and it can be washed, so I can still write in the date, which I will be doing right after this live. So that's super important. So these are some of the things that I do include on my labels. Now, I know a lot of you are going to have questions, so hold them to the end, and we're going to do a Q&A at the end, and I will talk about that. But I want to show you some other ways that you can actually do your label. And I also want to talk about how I apply them and how I have applied labels in the past. So you can see here that this edge here, the upper and the side edge, is turned under and whip stitched down. These two edges are caught inside the binding. So when I am machine sewing the binding down from the front edge, I'm catching this edge of the label in as well. So I pin the label onto the back down into the edge. Then I machine sew the binding on. And then when I'm hand stitching to the back, I just, folding this over and then I'm catching the label inside the binding. So that's how I typically like to apply the label to my quilt. So it's usually in one of the lower corners, either the lower left or the lower right hand corner of the quilt, because at the top of the quilt I typically put a sleeve. Whether or not it's going to be on a bed, it doesn't matter to me. I still put a sleeve on it, and that way I always know the top from the bottom. If you have a specific top to the quilt, this particular quilt did not have a specific top or bottom, but I still put a label on it because it gets photographed. So in order for it to hang properly, it needs a sleeve on it. So this is one way to apply a label. You can also just applique it right onto the back anywhere. A lot of people also like to sew their label right into the backing fabric, and you can do that, and it makes it a very permanent part of that quilt. So that you can do as well. And if you're putting a sleeve on it, you can also make it part of your sleeve if you want. You can actually make the label your sleeve. So there's another idea for you as well. Now I'm going to pull out a couple other examples, and I'm going to put them right here. I want to show you some other ways. Whoops, sorry, I just hit that overhead cam. Okay, now this is a cool example too. So I actually did this label in, it's a word processing program. So on my Mac, it's called Pages, but on Windows, I believe it's called Word. And I just made a little text box, and I put down this is my design. So the quilt is here. I actually, at the time, I didn't have a nice flat picture of the finished quilt, but I had the digital mock-up. So I took the digital mock-up, put it next to the text box in the program, and then I just chose the fonts I wanted. I did a little dotted line just to make it a little fancy. Designed and quilted by Jackie Kunkel of Canton Village Quiltworks, Canton, Connecticut. Pieced by Sally Murray. I had my friend Sally do this using Island Batik fabrics. Wasn't any specific collection at the time, and this was done completed. And I always put the completion date is what I do. If you've been working on a quilt for years, you could always say started on and have that date, and then completed on. And this was, for me, this was the completion date, February of 2016. Now you can see when this label was added, I did not secure it in the edges. I just didn't do it at that time. I think I had the binding on first for whatever reason, and then made the label afterwards. So this is turned down on all edges. Now, the type of fabric that I use, this was printed off on EQ Printables fabric. I think I used their cotton lawn, and it is an 8.5 inch by 11.5 inch sheet, which you feed into your printer. And then whatever you've done on your word processing program will print out on that. You let it sit, let it dry, and you follow the manufacturer's instructions, and you then follow those instructions. Once it's done, then you cut it down to the size you want. I turned it under, and I whip stitched it to the back. So this is another cool way to do it. Gives you a little something fancier than just handwriting out a label. So that's another alternative. Now let me grab one more. I got a few down here I want to show you. Okay. So this one here, this is actually, you'll see it's a set. So this one is called It's a Celebration. These are the actual pictures. So these are the placemats, and I'll show you the placemats. These are from my book, Splash of Color. So here's the placemats. Let me zoom out so you can see the placemats. Oops, wrong picture again. Hang on, wrong camera. Let me zoom out so you can see that. There is the placemat. Okay, now I'm going to zoom back in so you can see the label, because that's what we really want to talk about. So these are from there. It's the actual picture of the placemats and the table runner, and it's from my book Splash of Color. If you haven't seen my book, it is available on my site. But what I did was similar to the last one that I showed you. I did on the word processing program, but I took the JPEGs in of the actual quilts, the placemats and the table runners, and then I did a little text box here. And what I wrote on here is I wrote the name. It's a celebration. Placemats and table runner, designed, pieced, and quilted by Jackie Kunkel. Completed June 2014, Canton, Connecticut. Created for my first book, A Rainbow of Black and White Quilts. And at the time, so you see what this says, A Rainbow of Black and White Quilts. At the time, that was the working name we were going with until we decided for Splash of Color. And then A Rainbow of Brilliant Black and White Quilts became the subtitle. So, and because these went in way before the publication date of it. So, but that is another version of how to do the label. And again, this was put on after the binding, so it was whip stitched down completely. And again, I use the EQ printables. Now, I've got some other versions, and then we're going to talk about some other ways to do your labels too. Okay, so this one here, let's see. This one I did on my, I'm going to zoom out just a little bit on this. Let me zoom out just a little because I'm really in close there. There we go. Okay, so this one is, I did it on my embroidery machine, and I did it, I loved it because I did it on the plain black fabric. I had the ability to add, you know, a little creative design. I got a little creative, and I varied the fonts up. So I did a little different font up top, and then again, pieced by Jackie Kunkel, Canton Village Quiltworks, Mesa, Arizona, April 2020. Quilted by Margaret Gunn. Molas are from Panama. Now, this quilt, I actually made the quilt top years ago, but I never completed it, never finished it. But I did finish it April of 2020. So I don't remember the actual date that I started the quilt. It was a long time ago. That is something where, again, where I said at the beginning, where you lose some of that information if you wait so long, but it was just a top at the time. So my mistake, I should have had better knowledge of that. But anyway, so you can see how it's complete now. And but the embroidery machine gives you the ability to kind of play around a little bit. It takes a little while to stitch it out, but you get a really nice result. And then here's another version of kind of the same thing. I did this with, this was my quilty box quilt. I did a little design here because the quilt is called Starburst. So I had these little stars that are kind of bursting out. Designed, pieced, and quilted by Jackie Kunkel, Canton Village Quiltworks, for the October 2020 Quilty Box, using Jackie's Mandala Magic fabric collection from Island Batik, August of 2020, Mesa, Arizona. So there's a lot of information on here, and it's not that big of a label, but it carries a lot of information. I wanted to remember that I had designed this. I was their designer for their October 2020 Quilty Box, and I wanted to remember that. So I put that down here on the label, which was really important to me. And also that it was my fabric collection, that was super important. So when anybody, you know, has this down the line, when I'm no longer here, they're going to know that this quilt that was created was solely done by me, because I did all the designing, the piecing, the quilting, and right down to the fabric. Everything on this quilt was by me, which I would hope that my kids would appreciate that if they get this quilt. But it's information, and it's information packed, so that's important stuff to have. I have one more example for you. This one is from my most recent fabric collection. It's from my Blinded by Science fabrics, and you can see I varied up the font again. I kind of wanted to look a little sciencey, and I put a little DNA in here. I added a little something fun on there, and again, designed and pieced by me. April 2020, Canton Village Quiltworks, Mesa, Arizona, quilted by Shelly. April 2020, she got it back. She did an awesome job. If you didn't see this last week, I showed this on my, it was hanging behind me on my Watch Me Wednesday, and I've posted it a couple times. Anyway, using Jackie's Blinded by Science fabrics from Island Boutique. So again, a lot of information on here so that whoever gets this down the line can identify the quilt maker, the quilter, and when it was created, because that's all very, very, very important things. And again, this is again secured into the edge of the quilt through the binding and whip stitched down. Now, these are just examples of how I create my labels, but you can also, if you're a fan of hand embroidery, that would be awesome to do a hand embroidered label. It's a great way to even put more of your creativity into your quilt. And if you are a fantastic artist and you want to do a beautiful label using permanent markers and draw your own thing, that's another great way to do it. So it's your quilt. You need to do what you think is going to work best for you. But the important thing is for you to make sure that you are documenting everything, right? Because the documentation is the important part of the whole process. Hang on one second. I just want to make sure that's overhead there. Okay, so that's really what we're getting at. We want to make sure everything is documented appropriately so that people in the future, when we're not here and we can't tell them our stories about the quilt, they can identify that. I hope that all makes sense to all of you. I think it's super, super important. Now, I do want to show you one more thing. You can also do something simple like this. And let me just flip the camera again so you can see the overhead. I forgot to show you this before. But I also have these cute little labels that can go, like you can put these in the edge. See, they have my website and so they can kind of go in the binding if you want. Like, they're kind of like a shirt label sort of. I had them specially printed up. I've put them in the edges of pillows, in bags. So these are another way to identify. It doesn't have a whole lot of information on it, but it can aid the person in identifying where the quilt or the bag or the pillow came from. So these are another great way to do it. I have a bunch of them. So they're another great tool, and you can get these custom made up with whatever you want on them. So that's really kind of cool. Anyway, so let's go to some questions. So let me scroll back and see if there were any questions here. Patty's saying something. If you have questions, type them in. Patty says, she's just begun keeping a written documentation of my quilts, and it's been difficult to remember past quilts. That's also, by the way, a great way to document your quilts. Maybe have like a picture and then documentation like in a journal. But I agree, there's that problem. It's difficult to remember the past quilts, especially some of the information about those quilts. So that's another great reason to have a label on the quilt. So that's super important. I totally agree with that. How many of you document your quilts like in a journal or something like that? Give me a thumbs up if you do. Let's see if there's any. Let's see. Sue has got a question. Hang on. Let's see what Sue's question is. Sue says, I know you've told me before, but what are the average sizes of your label that you embroidered? They look huge. So these are actually it depends on the size of the quilt too, Sue. So I have to keep that in mind. If the quilt's bigger, I can make them a little larger. If the quilt is smaller, I make them smaller. But this one measures out at the one for building blocks is, I'm going to give you approximate here because I got my little cutting mat here. So it's about 12 inches by 8, 12 by 8 for the building blocks one. So it's about 12 by 8. But then again, if it's a smaller quilt, I will make it smaller. So I will scale them back. And that becomes a personal preference. So if there's something that if you want to make it smaller, you can. If you want to make it round, make it round. If you want to make it triangular, make it triangular. So whatever shape you want to make it, do it. But and you can do that any way you want on an embroidery machine. I could have cut this out in a circle if I wanted to. But for me, sometimes time is of the essence, so I do as simple as I can just so that I get it done because oftentimes on a deadline. Let's see, there's a couple other questions here. Let's see. And the size of the embroidered lettering. So Patty, that's a good question. Again, that's going to be dependent on the size of the label that I'm making at the time. So I usually try to keep the lettering like for the name of the quilt. So let's just go to the overhead here again. So for this one, for the name of this quilt, the lettering on this for the title, I kept larger than the lettering for the description. So I always try and do that. I try and keep the title larger and the information a little bit smaller. So this was probably, I would say 20 millimeters. I think it's measured out in millimeters, 20, and maybe this was 15, somewhere in there. But I don't usually get bigger than that or smaller than that because sometimes depending on the font you choose, it won't look really good when it's actually stitched out on the embroidery. So you kind of gotta play with that, and you gotta know your machine. So that's super important. And so you're gonna find that you're gonna get used to what your machine does and what looks best. So that's something that you kind of experiment with. Okay, let's see. And we've got another question here from, hang on a second. Deb says, where did you get, oops, hang on a second. Where did you get the shirt labels? That's a good question, Deb. I got them, I don't remember the name of the place. I'm going to have to research it and see if I can get back to you. I got them a while ago. I actually have quite a bit of them because I ordered them in bulk. But I want to say it's something like Custom Labels, something like that. But it was a long time ago. So it was before I moved here to Arizona. So that had to be at least I moved here in 2016. So had to be at least 6 years ago, if not earlier than that. So I'll see what I can find, but I think I want to say something like Custom Labels. Let's see, we've got a question here from April. Let's see, April says, I have tried using Word to create my label, but recently I have been putting freezer paper on the back of my label fabric and handwriting the info. Mine are triangular and sewed on prior to binding. Yeah, that's a great way. So when the handwritten ones, that's exactly what I do, April. I put freezer paper, I iron it on with the dry iron, and it keeps that fabric nice and stable so that you can handwrite whatever you're going to write on that label, and it makes your handwriting look nicer because the fabric won't stretch and move as you're writing or drawing. Um, and I love the fact that you're using a triangle, so you're taking the corner and putting it in. I think that's fantastic. It's a little bit different, so that's great. That's awesome. Um, and I think it's fun. I think it's a fun way to do it. Do you have any other questions? Let me just scroll back and see if there are any other questions. I got a lot of people here from, let's see, fingers crossed. Okay. If you have any other questions, just jot them down. Let's see. I've got one other comment here just popped up. Let's see. Chris says she's used pick or colored pencils to decorate her labels. Yes, definitely. Make sure though that if you're using a colored pen or a colored pencil or a marker or something, that it is not water soluble, that you can heat set that so that when you wash or launder that quilt, that information doesn't go away. And if you notice that that information is going away, you want to make sure that you redo that label before your information is lost. So that's super important. Oh, good. I see Chris just put up. She said she uses the permanent ones. Awesome. Glad you're using the permanent ones. I'm wondering, do you have to heat set those? Because I don't think I've ever used well, no, I've used colored markers that you heat set. So you're using colored pens, so I'm assuming they're the same thing, and that you heat set it before you put them on the quilt. That's my assumption. Yes, awesome. Awesome. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I do have a little announcement I want to make, though. So if you hang in with me for a few more seconds. I think there's one more question. Let's get to that. Patty just finished a quilt for her sister-in-law to give as a gift, so I included on the label that it was a gift from her. That's also a nice idea. Great when you're given a gift. I think that's perfect idea, perfect information, Patty. Yeah. So what I wanted to tell you all is that I am going to be rolling back my Watch Me Wednesdays to every other week for a little while. I have something that I'll be announcing to you probably in 2 weeks, because I'm not going to be coming back next week. I won't do Watch Me Wednesday next week. I will have one in 2 weeks, and I'll probably be announcing it to you then. So I'm going to be rolling back and just doing one Watch Me Wednesday every other week for a little while. And you'll hear why in 2 weeks when you see me in 2 weeks. So remember, no Watch Me Wednesday next week. I will have a Watch Me Wednesday the week after, and I will let you know why I'm going to go to every other week at that point. So, in the meantime, if you have anything you'd like to see me talk about or do on Watch Me Wednesday, let me know. Oh, and also, if any of you are wondering about the quilt behind me, I know a lot of you know that I have 2 of my own online classes that I've done myself. This one is an online class that I have with Craftsy. I have 2 online Craftsy classes as well, which you can join in at any time. This one is an exclusive to Craftsy, called Paper Piecing the QuiltWorks Dresden Plate. So it is a Judy Niemeyer exclusive design that we did for Craftsy. So Judy, Judelle, Brad, and I worked on this design and did this design as an exclusive paper piecing pattern from QuiltWorks to you through Craftsy. So you can join up in my class on this. And then I also have a double wedding ring pickle dish class on Craftsy too. But I just thought this was served as a pretty backdrop today. So I didn't know if you were wondering about it. But so yeah, if you belong to Craftsy you can certainly take this class and my other one as well. But in the meantime, yeah, Chris, it must be important. It is important, Chris. Thank you. And I will let you know in 2 weeks. Anyway, so until then, until 2 weeks, I won't see you next week, but until then, you have a great couple of weeks. Do get lots of quilting, lots of sewing done. Stay well, stay safe. And I also wanted to tell you, I am so happy I got my first COVID vaccine. First dose down, one more to go, March 30th, and I'm very happy about that. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed today, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. Enjoy your day. Happy quilting, everybody. Bye-bye.